The first drawings that I had done were of fire people, and then this fire character and a water character coming into a city. The idea of these elements started off from the periodic table of elements. It always looked like an apartment complex to me, and that concept started from like, oh, what if the elements were characters, but we boil it down to the classical elements like earth, wind, water, and fire.
Those are characters we've never done before.
How are we going to possibly animate that?
I would start showing this around, and there would be this wall of like, oh, how are you going to do that? This question of, oh, what if fire fell in love with water connected to me with my relationship with my wife who wasn't Korean. I just love animation. Ember and Wade were really fun characters to move around.
Wade cries at the drop of a hat.
What a happy family.
He just really is a wonderful, sensitive guy. Maybe too sensitive.
There's a lot of different levels of outpouring of emotion, let's call it.
And it's your birthday!
Very emotional, and in the way that Ember also has her anger always right under the surface.
She definitely have a temper issue.
By meeting Wade, it actually kind of helps her turn her fire into good. And I don't think anyone ever really told her that, like, you can do something good with that fire versus just cause an earthquake in your dad's shop.
I think a goal from the beginning for this movie was to make sure the characters weren't human-like characters who had water flowing on top of them. For Ember, it wasn't that she was a skeleton on fire, it's that she is fire and Wade is water.
They have like hands and legs, and then they have face similar to us, but that does not mean that they will move like human.
We had the challenge to create characters who were very fluid and behaved very elemental, and we didn't necessarily have systems in place yet for achieving that.
If you set something on fire and you want to make a character out of it, a puppet out of it, like, I don't know how to do that. And that's kind of what the challenge of this film was, is like, how do you make a puppet out of fire or a puppet out of water? All of the kind of language we know about skin, hair, cloth had to be reimagined and invented.
So we had to take inspiration from the elements themselves.
Like, I would just be staring at fire for long amounts of time. It's weird. And then whenever I would see water, I would be thinking like, this is good reference.
And then trying to pull the essence of that, something from the timing or the spacing or the design of it. The first animator on the film was Tarun Lak, and one of the first things he did was explore Wade and Ember.
This is just an early test I created to explore how water and fire could interact. A lot of the fun comes out of exploring how the element plays a part and how to kind of integrate the element best within the performance.
It was a pretty unique challenge. You come on a show and the director immediately wants characters without any bones in it. And usually all our setups are based on bones and joints.
And it took a long, long time and a lot of failed experiments to figure out the approach to make Wade and Ember.
When I was just started developing Ember, I just had it in my mind that what if she's like really flexible, so even though she's just walking, she kind of looks like she's dancing. There's no straight line in her line of action. Every time she moves, there's always curve to it.
There is a fluidity to fire, but it's primarily spiky forms, sharp, and that's in her form because of her personality as well as her element.
Pete always wanted to feel like a flame. So that was the baseline of the shape language of her body and face.
The goal was to simplify the fire itself and stylize it between realism and really simple cartooning.
Early on, we worked with a 2D animator, and he would take really early kind of mock-ups of Ember and draw over them with 2D animation. That really helped us understand maybe what we would mechanically have to build in this 3D world. And one of them was just the sort of figure eight quality that he would create in the drawing of Ember's leg as she moved forward, and that helped us get rid of that rigid feeling.
We added a bunch of controls for animation to loosen things up.
We were able to partner and develop some controls that allowed us to turn down the speed of the fire, and that would also reduce the amount of tear-offs. It would reduce the amount of embers that were fluttering above her to try to get her down to a slower, almost more like candlelit feel.
We developed this thing called the emotion system. She could have different curated looks, one for pure anger, another one just her normal look.
And then we're using also mitten geometry to combine her fingers as well, to go like into a simplistic form of her hand if we needed to.
The hand, for simplicity from a distance, often would be a mitten. But as she would separate her fingers, the animators could, have individual fingers, or they could have a mitt.
This can't be just a mitt full of fire. She did need to be able to emote with her hands and pick things up and do different things.
That way, Ember can actually retract and grow back the hands if she wants to. And the same with any other portions of her body.
And that translated into that idea of presence and being able to shrink various parts of her body and slide that around to create an effect of moving transparency.
There was such a handshake on this film, more so than any other, between animation, shading, our close work together with the characters team for the rigging and modeling, and of course the effects department.
That's what the animators see, and that's the final render.
It was really an artistic adventure to discover how loose the pyro could be, how tight to the animation it had to be, and in a variety of settings.
I think a lot of the real discovery of the scale of fire, the behavior of fire, was the effects team. They really dialed that in to create a physically natural looking fire that could somehow move like a cartoon. It was magic.
And that really made Ember feel like Ember.
As difficult as Ember was, Wade would present a whole new set of challenges.
Wade's shape language is an interesting one.
We don't want him to look like a human man body and then just wrapped it in water shape. That's not what we wanted it. We want him to be soft, just like his personality.
He's very round. He has no sharp edges, fluid. is a good word for him.
There's a lot of interesting things about a water character.
What does a water character do when they're standing still? What does water look like? What's sort of the internal ecosystem of his water?
The busyness of water. It reflects light, it reflects the environment. Just the reflection of the environment actually creates all this additional busyness. The refraction, what you see through, like behind, also adds all this additional busyness.
So if you think about like trying to make this into a face, it's pretty tricky because there's all this stuff going on back here. And if you want to really see the face, you don't want this.
The first images of Wade were generated with a very realistic water. And that was really useful because Pete saw that and said, I don't want this to be realistic. This can't be realistic because if you think of water at the scale of Wade's head, it's totally transparent.
Wade, because he's a transparent character, he's made of water, he's actually super see-through. He's interacting with every light, everything right behind him, you can see right through him. We have to be very careful about what you see through him and how to make that visually not too complex, but still feel like he's a water character that you can see through and get the sense that he's translucent and kind of flowy.
We had to come up with rules for when certain things were visible and when they weren't. If you're looking at the back of his head and he opens his mouth, can you tell? Do you see an opening or what? And we decided no.
We knew Pete's inspiration for Wade's head shape was a water droplet, so we always tried to keep that in mind of keeping that sort of very circular, smooth bottom up to the sharper droplet top. A lot of Wade was making sure there's no sharp edges, keeping it very smooth, so I think the sort of smooth little nubs at the end of his feet were part of that sort of design philosophy, to make sure everything's smooth and water droplet-y.
He has a very iconic hairstyle.
What does it mean for hair that's moving and looks like water? We were getting drawings from art, and then we were simulating an idea for the hair. The hair is the most active part of Wade, so it has the most simulation in it. We started a little bit more softer shapes and ended up with these 3 wave shapes we always wanted to see, to recognize even though the hair is going to be moving a lot, Wade's going to be moving a lot. As long as we can sort of feel these 3 wave shapes, we're going to know that's Wade.
One of the really gratifying things is like starting early, not really even knowing how to solve the problem, but finding our way.
The incredible tools that the team would put together to find the layers to get to where we are right now has been both super challenging, but incredibly inspiring.
Feels crazy to see it all come together at the end of the day. It's been such a long journey.
We're all like super proud of Ember. We're really super proud of Wade and the character design.
The hurdles that we've overcome as a team have really been tremendous. And like with any film, you really fall in love with the characters. You get to know them so intimately. You're thinking every day about what they're thinking and how they feel about things. And it's really hard at the end of a film to say goodbye to them and just sort of walk away from a project and let them be.
The world that we built, I really wanted it to feel hopeful.
We wanted a metropolis, but we have 4 different elemental types of people. It was really like designing for 4 movies. And so the scale is massive.
Looking at the initial artwork, I was like, oh my gosh, this is one of those worlds that's just beyond imagination.
This is a place that's growing, it's rich, it's really a place you want to go. It's a place I want to go.
I think Pete's vision was something similar to his upbringing in New York. He's part of an immigrant family who sacrificed so much to come to America, come to New York.
He wanted it to be like New York City, but not New York City.
It really was just, how do we take the things that people are familiar with any big metropolis and translate that into either a fire version or a water version, etc., and then bring hopefully some wit or humor.
We had to think about like how would each element use the city and interact with the city.
The idea was that the waves of immigrants shaped Element City.
Pete wanted the world to have been built by water people, right? They were there first.
For Ember, going into a city built by water, that's all dangerous for her, and so we're trying to capitalize on that feeling that I remember of like, yeah, this would, everything's in English, and it's not in Korean, so that's not built for you.
The idea for Firetown was that the first wave of immigrants were Earth people to that part of Element City. And so they built buildings and designed it for them. And then they moved out. And then the next wave of immigrants were Fire people from Fireland. They kind of adapted the Earth buildings to be more fire-like.
And so I think there's an awesome texture that you get because you have those layers of history.
Here's the people sort of molding this environment as much as they can to their needs, to their desires, to their history, their culture, that type of thing.
Early on, like when developing the fire culture, fire and cooking was related, and we thought, well, let's look at some cooking utensils and tools. And one that I loved was this Korean cooking pot, the gamasot pot, and it had a kind of a brim ring on it that was really interesting and a dome, and I thought that would be really cool for just like a house or something, and we would stack them up and make a little apartment building.
It's an optimistic place, they're happy to be there. And so the architecture and the lighting have to support that idea.
Firetown has this beautiful, rich, deep reddish tone we can push, especially when you're in Firetown and they're burning things. They have coal stacks that the effects department gave us. We're able to kind of use all those elements to color the air.
It was important that it didn't feel like oppressive. So it's not like a factory like Dickens' London where there's this dingy kind of ash in the air, but more of a hopeful smoke in the air.
The fireplace set and the shop in general was very personal to Pete.
He shared so many stories about his family and his childhood. It was really great to hear about his background and talk about his dad's shop when we were building all this stuff out, because you had this sort of real world story going parallel with the story that we were building, and it made it just that much more real and that much more emotional too.
I remember growing up in a shop, and when you grow up in a shop, it does become home, you remember the places where you take a nap or you remember where you help the customer. But most of the time, you're just seeing your parents work really hard. I love this. He's genuinely good at talking and connecting with the customers. Yeah, and we need to cast that customer who's gonna be waiting forever. She's never gonna get these calls.
Nice hat, by the way. Let me make you a new badge. On the house.
There's a certain level of handcrafted feel to Firetown. There's a connection to another human being, like, oh, I know somebody's hands made that. And that feels richer, it feels like it has a life. It has that sense of like, okay, these people put a ton of effort into this space.
That was definitely something that we thought about for Bernie, was that we wanted it to look like it was been made over time, that he had patched things over time and things weren't perfect, so he actually made it by hand.
I am not an inspector. You are, Inspector.
Obviously, there's a city inspector in the film, and so there's this whole notion of there's code, there's the way you're supposed to do something, and then there's the way that people actually do it. Bernie probably has that sort of that do-it-himself attitude, that mentality.
My dad rebuilt this place himself.
He did all of this himself without permits?
The fact that it is handmade also sells this other story point, which ultimately brings Wade into Ember's world because it's just a little bit off.
Ember, she grew up in Firetown and she sort of stayed in that neighborhood. And then she ventures out when she gets this ticket.
Element City was really designed as something that was not really comfortable for fire people to be in.
If 80% of the world isn't built for you, how do you navigate that world?
Hey, sorry.
And for Ember to explore into that neighborhood was a big deal.
So it was really an effort to make things look like they were buildings that could exist in a city, but something that was very clearly drawing to like an element. We were really trying to develop what the look of the city was going to be, and I think all we really had were basic models of buildings with the intent that we were going to kind of refine it as we go.
So I did a bunch of work coming up with window designs. I made probably 50 different sets and styles of windows.
Adding windows onto a building really makes it look like a building.
A lot of the work was the lighting of the apartments behind the windows. What does it look like at night to make it look like there's people that live here, and how many rooms should be on, and should they be clustered together or should they be random? And so all of those kinds of elements are things we think about in shading when we're making a building like that.
A good example of a big piece of Element City is Mineral Lake. We had some shots where it's just like this big city, the lake, Ember and Wade right there, two little dots.
Their backdrop is this big city, and so you kind of wanted that sort of Central Park romantic feel, you know? There's just the early inklings of romance there.
What's this?
But it's like broad daylight and really beautiful, and has that sort of big city sense of wonder to it. But I always loved that about Manhattan and Central Park, of like this big, large park, and then these giant skyscrapers set next to it. I feel like it makes a wonderful contrast.
Ember's relationship with her environments, I think it starts off really tumultuous and kind of just in opposition to her, and she's constantly fighting through it. And I think by the end, she's able to find a way to get along with her environment.
There's a scene when Ember's just kind of head in the clouds, feeling just excited about the day, and she's walking home. So the Wetro train goes by, and there's this huge wall of water. And it's the first time that Ember looks at water, and she's just like, wow, it's magical. But then also seeing herself reflecting in that water. She's never really seen herself associated with water, and she's actually affecting the water and making it more beautiful.
Pete's story is so like central to all this. It really is beautiful. His family, his parents. It's kind of, personal for a lot of us too, which is really amazing.
The city for me was always about like this thing that represented this idea of not the melting pot, but the salad bowl and everyone sort of coming and living together.
I think the team really captured something that I relate to, and hopefully audiences will too.
When you're watching it, it doesn't matter where you're from or what your background is, you can almost project yourself into the story. So getting to work on that and help bring it to life was, it was a dream come true. It was so cool to get to be a part of that, and I hope that people look at this world and are inspired by it.
This scene is called Brooke Dinner. It comes from a version of the movie where Brooke, Wade's mom, was the villain. She was systematically flooding Firetown and wanted to break Ember and Wade up, and it has a very different tone, but ultimately what we wanted to go for was this sweeping romance. So it changed quite a bit, but hope you enjoy.
The last few weeks you've helped me see how much beauty there is in the world.
I thought you were trying to make me cry.
But mostly you've helped me realize I don't want to go to the pipeline.
Okay, enough fun and games. Ember, shall we talk? I'm so glad you came.
Yeah, me too. Let's get to it. Wade and I have been tracking where the water in Firetown comes from. And it's not environmental.
I beg your pardon?
It comes down the culvert from pipes under the city. We followed them to what we thought was the source, the dam. But it's not.
I could have told you that. The dam is flawless. It was my mother's crowning achievement.
But then I remembered the windmills. One of them was spinning the day Wade and I were there, so I went back again today. It's still spinning. Why would that be?
Well, it wouldn't, because they were disabled when we built the waterway system.
Unless somebody wanted them on. To flood my people out.
Who? Me? Don't be ridiculous.
Or her.
That's crazy. My mother would never do anything like that. She was a great woman, celebrated by the city.
Huh. Water finds a way. Isn't that what she told my dad?
You know, my son is quite taken with you. He can't stop talking about your shop, the blue flame, your art.
It's just melted glass. And what does that have to do with anything?
Look at the new city. Practically everything you see is just melted glass. You have a skill people could use. Have you thought of that?
I did once, but it was a long time ago.
Exactly. You put it aside because you're a shopkeeper.
Excuse me?
I don't mean that in a bad way. It's an honorable profession. It's your family's legacy, just like the pipeline is my family's legacy. It's what we do. Suppose you're right about my mother, about her flooding Firetown.
Oh, I'm right.
And suppose I can fix it. Stop the windmills, divert water under the town instead of through it. If I did that, could we keep this whole thing between us?
No, you can't. It's crazy expensive. It's insane to even think about. Money doesn't float on ponds, you know?
Strip, park it. This is about my mother's reputation.
Yeah, I could keep this quiet.
But you'd also have to keep something else quiet. Something I'd need you to do for me in return.
What is it?
End your friendship with Wade.
What?
He doesn't want to leave because of you. I can't have his future and our family legacy threatened. Make a clean break. When you do, and he goes to the pipeline, I'll fix the water problem.
You mean just cut him off?
It'll be our secret. Be reasonable. You knew he was leaving. Plus, you're fire, he's water. It's not like anything could come of it. Great talking to you. Congratulations, your family legacy is safe.
What happened? Ember, wait up! I'll walk you out.
This scene is called Dante Challenge.
Dante's character actually helps to accentuate Wade's character, where shows that Wade is very genuine, has a big heart, and I really love that about Wade. The reason the scene was deleted was because the story was initially more about Ember and Bernie's rivalry, but eventually we changed it more into Ember's internal conflict, so Dante was no longer needed in the film and we had to get rid of him. I hope you enjoy watching Hot Dante as much as I love drawing him.